Alright, so we will pick up with D-Day. So
Right. We all knew that D-Day was coming, and through our time came also. And we assisted in the landings, and it was it was so impressive because we flew above these guys. And here you just see the like it was 10,000 ships on the ground, and air was just full of airplanes, gliders, oh, you name it. I won't go into the gliders except maybe a little later on, but we partook in a number of these missions. Went in, picked up. The Germans were retreating from the east coast, no, the west coast of out where Saint Michel was, and the Germans had their sub base there, and so the Americans were concentrating on that, where the heavy bombers were too, trying to do away with those, and we started supporting General Patton at that time, right when that push was started. The Germans were retreating, and boy, they were pushing them back like mad. They started going south, the Germans, to get away from everything, and we were right in there, along with others. When I say we, I'm talking about the U.S. fighters. These vehicles were just lined up on the highways, going like as fast as they could. We just come in and we go down the highway and shoot up everything down the highway that we could shoot up. Tanks, we'd catch the tanks and stop them. Sometimes Tiger tank was pretty good. Then they get the Panthers and so on, but they went from one type of tank to another type, improving the gun that they had too. But that was where we really connected with General Patton, and he was the 3rd Army commander then, and his armored division, and D-Day was June the 6th, and all of this was, we go down and strafe, do our positions. Our squadron happened to have Cherbourg in the area, the Cherbourg Peninsula, as our target area, and on D-Day, and so we went do our missions. I had holes in my airplane, hole about big around as your body, in my one wing, from flak that hit me. A lot of guys were. We only lost a few during the real busy times of D-Day. But then the Navy was out there in the Channel, English Channel, as well as I said, 10,000 other ships. I think they we'd fly so low, perform our strafing missions that you'd hear these shells coming in from these ships, from the battleships and stuff coming in, aiming at their targets. When we get in the line, you could actually it'd shake you up in the airplane. That was always a thrill because you hate to think, what the hell, our own troops would hit you with this and blow you to smithereens. Excuse me. We followed up with Patton. We had ideal situations following up, and then eventually they had chosen a location for our base to go to in France. And even though it was, the invasion took place the 6th of June, it was the 12th of July before we were able to fly into our base in France, a place called Picoville, which is just out of Saint Mère-Église, which is a famous place because the war movies and all that show this guy hanging from a church steeple and one of the paratroopers from the 101st Division, Airborne Division. Well, as I say, we were only a couple of miles away from them, and a little town. We used to get, when we first got there, it was back and forth. The Germans would have it at one time, and we'd get it back. Our troops, our ground troops. So that's what took so long to get in there. And then, the base itself was made of what they call planking. This was planking that they It was perforated, and they'd hook onto one of each other, so they couldn't come loose. And they just run this. We had one that was 5,000 feet long, but as you go over it, it would buckle up underneath you, from the weight you were carrying or pushing. It was always interesting because in the cold, or when it was cool, why, or damp, it was get slippery. You had to watch your, and that was one of the beautiful features of P-47 too. It had a super wide landing gear, where the P-51 had a narrow one, and that was the danger part of a P-51 was the narrow landing gear. And if you didn't land correctly or properly, it would give you the wobbles, and you might spin out. And, not us. It was it was nice and wide, and the interesting part also was that our crew chiefs, and this took place every time we flew a P-47s, your crew chief would have to lead you out to the runway because you had this monstrous engine sticking out in front of you, and you were a three-point aircraft. You were pointing up in the air all the time, so you could not see ahead of you as the pilot, looking ahead to try to see where you're going. So your crew chief would get on your wing and guide you out to the takeoff part of the runway. And then he'd line you up with the runway, and you would lock your tail wheel and go from there, and that was for takeoffs. And on landing, he'd be waiting for you out at the end of the landing strip, no matter where it was. And as soon as you landed and turned around, he'd come out and jump on your wing and take you back. Now, some of the times he couldn't be there, so what you did, you S down the runway. You go from one side to the other and be able to peek out one side to the other till you made it back to where the parking area was. And I think it was, it wasn't 24 hours after we arrived at this base, by the way, that we had Bed Check Charlie would come by. And at that time we were living in tents. We had pyramidal tents, and you lived in 6 men to a tent. And you had a stove, heating stove that was in the middle of it. And cots, you stayed on cots with sufficient, sufficient stuff. But it was wood flooring you had. And you'd get out and one of the guys, one of the 6 guys who were in my group, in the tent, got a piece of wood somewhere and wrote our names on it in order that he wanted, whatever they were. It wasn't alphabetical naturally, but it was in order, all 6 of us. And just so happened I ended up being the last one on the list of the 6. And as time went on, we ran into a few missions, and we ran through St. Lo and all of these places we went through, backing up Patent. And the guys on the board would get shot down exactly as they were listed on the board. And we didn't think anything about this till the first 2 went, And this was sad days in our time. And what we did as an officers' club, we always had an officers' club. And it was a tent, but we had a bartender, and the bartender was a guy named Sergeant Smith, and he was the guy that packed up your parachutes. And, when you'd come in, he'd have to get hold of them, and then he'd pack them up again. And he would be the bartender at our club. We would get, and that was peculiar in those days, because we would get, ever since we were over in Europe, and England too, this was a fact, every mission we went on, we'd get ounce and a half of whiskey. Now, English call whiskey, Scotch. We don't call that whiskey. We want to, and so, anyways, we get this. We let this accumulate. All of us in the squadron would let our booze accumulate to a party time. Maybe 2 weeks or something ahead. Then we throw a party and have a good party, and everybody get drunk and so on. But we had that, and that continued on. We also got a ration of 1 quart and a pint a month, which was nice. But the trouble there was that they didn't have a selection, and mostly it was their Scotch that we got. And sometimes we'd get vodka, sometimes we'd get just whatever was available that we got until more supplies were coming over. So that was standard issue. We get that later on while we were at A8 was the name of this strip that we had in France, by the way. We'd throw parties, and we'd accumulate our booze and get our booze from the quart a pint a month, and we'd go to the closest field hospital that we had. There was a number of them because of the guys getting wounded, shot up, blown apart, and all. We put up a sign saying, "Hey, we're 509th is having a party. Saturday night, so and so. We'll be here to pick you up at such and such a time." So what we did, we got these 6x6 trucks. I don't know. That's a big truck. I'm sure you have seen pictures of them. That was a primary truck that the military used, and they transport troops, everything, supplies, the whole works. But we got this, and if it was cold, now this was later on in time, not necessarily. We got there in July and August and so on, which were warm months. But later on down the line, I probably am getting a little ahead of my story because most of this took later on when it got cold weather. But up to that time, we would send a 6x6 to pick up the nurses and bring them to the squadron, and we'd have a party and dance and whatever, and depend on the moods of everybody what happened. But we all had a good time, and including the nurses, because they didn't have anything either. They had a tough job. They were busy all the time, and really they put forth a tremendous effort. And our missions continued. We had Bed Check Charlie, I was telling you. Well, Bed Check Charlie was a German plane, a bomber that came over, just circulated in the areas, and would drop bombs here and there, and without knowing. But you didn't know if he was going to drop one on your area or not. And the first night we were there in France at our new base, we heard Bed Check Charlie coming. And we were all told, "Oh, no, you better get in there and get your foxholes dug, so you'll have a place to go." The only thing that was dug in that time was a slit trench for where we would use for our going to the bathroom and toilet. And that's where it was a slit trench, and it dug, about 2 feet apart and 8-10 feet long, and that's where you did your business. And you had to be careful too, because if you did get too drunk, you'd fall in the thing. And anyways, none of us, okay, that stuff of building your fox head, they're not going to do that. Well, after the first night, when old Charlie dropped his bomb damn close to us, and we were all heading for foxholes. No foxholes. And we learned, boy, the next morning we were out there digging like mad, digging our own foxholes. We all had mess halls. We didn't have any thing. And they set up a mess halls where our enlisted men served their food, and out of our mess kits. We had our coffee cup and the rest of it mess kits. And the food, was GI food, terrible, And but we endured, and so did they. So did the enlisted men. They didn't have too bad a time. We had it was cut.